Hello there, I am Black Bright News, and I was listening to an advert on the radio about prostate cancer. And as I was listening to it, I'm not a man, but I thought to myself, how graphic is that? If I was a man, I'd run a mile. It's trying to tell men to have their prostate sorted, but it has got no sensitivity at all. It doesn't touch on any of the fears they might have, the fact that they might not want to be touched there, and all kinds of things. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a video on this. And I hope it touches where it's supposed to touch. And I'm fed up of hearing about prostate cancer and how many black men have died from it. That's what I titled it. I'm not a man, but I'm hoping to empathise. We're hearing it everywhere now, on the radio, on social media, in waiting rooms, in adverts that come on suddenly and say the same thing again and again. Go and get checked. And I want to say this carefully because the intention behind these messages matter. They come from a place of concern, but the intention isn't the same as impact. For some men, especially black men, those messages don't land as care. They land as intrusion. They land as noise. And after a while, they don't open hearts, they harden them. Not because men don't understand the risk, not because they're ignorant, but because fear, when it's spoken too loudly, learns how to shout back. There's a voice I hear often, sometimes said with humour, sometimes with defiance, sometimes with a laugh, that's doing a lot of emotional work. A voice that says, no one is crossing that line. No one now touch my jewels. A voice that draws a boundary and stands guard over it fiercely. That voice isn't stupidity. It isn't recklessness. It's protection. It's a shield built over years. Because for many black men, the body isn't just a body, it's history, it's control, it's privacy. It's the last place where dignity feels fully owned. And anything that threatens that, even in the name of health, can feel like a violation rather than help. We don't often talk honestly about how masculinity gets shaped, how early the lessons start. Be strong, don't complain, don't show weakness, don't let anyone see you vulnerable. Carry it quietly, handle it yourself. Those lessons don't disappear just because someone uses the word screening instead of exam. The body still remembers what vulnerability has cost in the past. So when adverts are graphic, clinical and blunt, when they repeat instructions without acknowledging fear, some men don't hear care, they hear command, and command invites resistance. I want to slow this conversation down because behind the bravado, behind the jokes, behind the switching off, there's usually something much quieter. A thought that comes late at night, a moment in the shower, a flicker of doubt that gets pushed away the next morning, a noticing, a wondering, and then the familiar decision. I'll deal with it later. Later can feel safer than now. Later doesn't ask anything of you today. Later lets you stay who you are, uninterrupted. But later has a habit of stretching. What rarely gets said in these campaigns is that many men don't avoid the GP because they think they're invincible. They avoid it because they're scared of what being seen might mean. Because being examined feels like being exposed in a way they were never prepared for. Because they don't want to feel small or powerless or embarrassed or out of control. There is a particular kind of fear that doesn't look like panic. It looks like avoidance. It looks like humour. It looks like irritation at hearing the same message again. It looks like saying, I'm fed up of this. What you really mean is, this scares me more than I know how to admit. And here's the part that's hardest to say. Not to judge, not to threaten, just to name gently. Avoiding the question doesn't always protect you from the answer. Sometimes it only delays it. And when the answer comes later, it's often louder, heavier, with fewer options attached. Many men only realise this in hindsight, not in a dramatic moment, often quietly sitting somewhere ordinary, thinking back to the first time they noticed something and chose not to ask. Not because they didn't care about their lives, but because fear felt more immediate than risk. This is where the conversation needs more compassion than commands, because fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Discomfort doesn't make you childish, it makes you honest. And being uncomfortable with the idea of being examined doesn't mean you don't value your life, it means you value your dignity. What no advert ever seems to say is that dignity doesn't disappear when you seek help. In fact, for many men who have gone through it, dignity is what they discovered on the other side. Not humiliation, not loss of manhood, but relief, control, information, choice. Some men will tell you, if you listen quietly enough, that the worst part wasn't the appointment, it wasn't the conversation, it wasn't even the news. The worst part was the years spent carrying the fear alone, letting it sit in the background of life, letting it decide things silently. And they, and they'll also tell you something else, that they wish someone had spoken to them without pressure, without graphic detail, without telling them what they should do. Just someone acknowledging how hard that first step feels. That's what's missing in so much messaging. Permission. Permission to feel conflicted. Permission to feel resistant. Permission to take your time. Permission to ask questions without commenting to anything yet. Strength isn't the absence of fear. Strength is not letting fear run the whole story. Strength can be as quiet as thinking, maybe I won't shut this down straight away. Strength can be as small as saying, I don't like the idea of this, but I don't want ignorance deciding my future either. This conversation doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't need scare tactics. It doesn't need constant repetition. Sometimes repetition just teaches people how to ignore what it needs to trust. Trust that men can sit with complexity. Trust that acknowledging fear doesn't increase it, it softens it. Trust that respect opens doors that force never will. If you're listening to this and you're tired of being told what to do with your body, that reaction makes sense. If you've switched off adverts because they feel invasive or uncomfortable, you're not alone. And if there's a part of you that knows this topic matters, but wishes it could be spoken about differently, more gently and more humanely, that part of you deserves attention too. This isn't about making a decision today. It's not about booking anything right now. It's about allowing yourself not to dismiss the conversation entirely. About letting the idea exist without pushing it away with humour or anger or defence. Because asking a question doesn't take away your control. Sometimes it's how you reclaim it. You don't owe anyone bravery on demand. You don't owe anyone access to your body. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your discomfort. But you do owe yourself honesty. And honesty sometimes begins with that quiet thought, I don't want fear to be the thing that decides for me. If that thought lands tonight, even softly, even briefly, that's enough. That's not weakness, that's courage. Not the loud kind, not the loud kind, not the performative kind, but the kind that keeps men alive long enough to tell their own stories in their own time. And that conversation worth having, gently, respectfully, on your terms. And that's a conversation worth having, gently, respectfully, on your terms. And I hope I've delivered that message sensitively. That's all for now. Bye-bye.